From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The nuclear deal between world powers and Iran is increasing hopes that the country's struggling economy will show signs of recovery. The deal eases economic restrictions against Iran, but only if the country honors a promise to limit some of its nuclear activities. Iran agreed to suspend parts of its nuclear program in return for an easing of sanctions on gold, its automobile industry, and on petrochemical exports. In Tehran, money traders are hopeful, even after seeing the value of Iran's currency drop by 80% compared to the American dollar. One foreign currency dealer says the improved conditions are the result of the recent nuclear talks. Matthew Levitt is with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He says he thinks the average Iranian has high expectations for what the nuclear deal will mean for them. But he says he thinks the agreement will mean very little for most Iranians in the weeks and months to come. Mr. Levitt says that could leave Iranian President Hassan Rouhani with a crisis of rising expectations. He says this may force the president to finalize a deal with other countries or find ways to blame the West for failing to reach a final agreement. However, it is not just Iranians who are hopeful. Plenty of foreign businesses are also starting to think about a country where experts say there is strong demand for American goods. Cliff Burns is an expert on export law. He does not expect companies to be in a hurry to enter the Iranian market, but he expects them to be interested in Iran and looking at it. For now, American officials say nothing has changed and that the trade restrictions are still in place. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Top trade officials reported progress, but no final deal after meetings in Singapore at the end of 2013. They met to discuss details of the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. The plan calls for removing non-tariff trade requirements among 12 Pacific nations. Supporters say the TPP would make trade easier and create jobs in those countries. But critics say some of the requirements exist to help protect workers and the environment. The 12 nations are responsible for about 1/3 of all world trade. They include Australia, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and the United States. Negotiators are attempting to settle several disputes. Some nations are arguing over intellectual property rights for films and music. Charles Bustani is a congressman from the American state of Louisiana. He notes that in 2011, trade exports and imports with TPP countries supported nearly 15 million jobs in the United States. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is an attempt to increase trade by making rules similar from one nation to another. Lori Wallach works with the American activist group Public Citizen. She says government trade rules protect the environment and the health of workers and people who buy imported goods. She says rules that make work conditions safe or protect health are under attack if they are defined as a barrier to international trade. Opposition from labor and consumer protection groups means the proposed deal faces an uncertain future in Washington. The agreement has to be confirmed by many national legislatures, including the U.S. Congress. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. A new report is praising South Africa for its economic growth over the past 20 years. The investment banking company, Goldman Sachs, examined South Africa's economic progress since the end of white minority rule. The report says the value of goods and services produced there jumped from $136 billion in 1994 to $400 billion. It also says the percentage of homes with electricity increased from 60 to 85. Colin Coleman works for Goldman Sachs. He says Nelson Mandela faced huge problems when he became South Africa's president. Mr. Coleman says the nation had large debts and no money. But he notes that those problems gave way to a time of economic growth and low inflation until the world financial crisis. Joanne Yawich heads South Africa's National Business Initiative. She says the Goldman Sachs report showed an increase in employment and a huge increase in the size of the middle class. But South Africa still has problems. The report notes that 85% of blacks are poor, while 87% of whites are middle to upper class. The education system continues to struggle, and the unemployment rate remains at about 24%. There has been criticism of the report. Tracy Ledger is a researcher at the Public Affairs Research Institute at Wits University in Johannesburg. She says the report does not appear to understand the real causes of poverty in South Africa. She notes that rising wages are a result of the high cost of living. Joanne Yawich agrees with some of the criticisms. Still, she says the report draws attention to the progress and the need to continue growing. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. A United Nations report says the world's poorest countries should re-examine their economic policies. It says these countries are failing to create jobs for their citizens. The report says the policies will not reduce poverty because so few jobs are being created. And it warns of social unrest and growing numbers of immigrants
if the situation does not improve. Tafra Tesfaciu is with the UN Conference on Trade and Development. He says a new way of thinking is needed. He says economic growth needs to create jobs. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund have called for economic stability and liberalization policies in poor and underdeveloped countries. But such policies have failed to create many jobs, even during the economic expansion from 2002 to 2008. During that period, the economies of many least developed countries grew 8% or more each year. The UN has identified 49 least developed countries. They were defined as nations where personal income was less than $992 on a 3-year average. The report also considered the economic problems each nation faced and its rating on the Human Assets Index. The index measures health, school attendance, and the ability to read. 34 of the least developed countries are in Africa. There are 9 others in Asia, 5 in the Pacific, and 1 in the Caribbean. Tafra Tesfaciu says countries should invest in labor-intensive industries to create jobs for the millions of unemployed. He predicts problems in areas that move directly from agriculture to a service-based economy while ignoring manufacturing. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The face of America's central bank is changing. The Senate recently confirmed Janet Yellen to lead the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. She will be the first woman to head the nation's central bank in its 100-year history. Ms. Yellen is replacing Ben Bernanke. She served as vice chair at the Federal Reserve during his second term as chairman. President Barack Obama nominated Janet Yellen in October. He said then she would be a fierce champion for the American people. He also said she understands that the goal of financial policy is to improve the lives and jobs of workers and their families. Economists are predicting that Janet Yellen will continue many of Ben Bernanke's policies. Both she and Mr. Bernanke have called for a measured reduction in the Federal Reserve's efforts to keep interest rates low. The Fed has bought $85 billion in government securities in an effort to push money into the economy. During confirmation hearings, Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio praised Ms. Yellen's ability to identify problems in the financial system. He also said she was not afraid to act to end abuses against American consumers and workers. But other senators criticized her support of what they called easy money policies. They said these programs will cause inflation. Janet Yellen has repeatedly expressed concern over labor issues, including unemployment. The jobless rate has remained well above historical averages since the end of the recession. Economists are predicting that the new Fed chair will keep the central bank's short-term interest rates close to zero. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.